Hi, friends. I'm Jennifer Bittinger, president of Narrativa. Thank you for joining me today to listen to some of our interviews from our advisory board members at Narrativa. These industry leaders have years of experience and expertise and knowledge about what works best in the clinical trial industry. So I hope you will be inspired and encouraged by their insights and their perspective on AI integration and how AI is going to help the clinical trial industry grow and become even more efficient so that we can save more lives. I hope you're encouraged. Thanks. Quick question for you today is, how do you see AI improving the regulatory documentation process for clinical trials? And what are the main use cases you see for AI within regulatory documentation?
Thanks, Jennifer. As you might know, I've been involved with clinical data standards for decades now, served as the CEO of CDISC previous 3 years. And one thing that standards brings about, especially in clinical trials, is this foundational element of truth, that the data that serves as the truth for evidence for clinical trials is now based on standards. And what AI then brings to that is can use that truth model, that truth foundational standards, to then use it for decision making or summarization or derivations of ideas or theories to further that process along. In the past decades, it's all been human driven, right? It's been done through use of reports and through reporting and medical writing and that sort of thing. But what you can then do is to train an algorithm in order to use those standards with the proper logic to then do those repetitive tasks or to do those derivation thinking or summarization thinking in a repetitive manner, and thus use the humans for the oversight, the quality, the checking, the validation, the verification, that sort of thing. At some point that it will become those focused use cases of AI will become better and better as they are used. And certainly the trust factor comes into account as the specificity and sensitivity associated with the use of those algorithms on standardized data becomes greater and greater. And what we're also seeing now is that the regulatory authorities, FDA in particular, is embracing the use of AI internally to do some of their own repetitive tasks, whether it be in the regulatory document processing or actually in the medical review report writing itself. So we're seeing the use of it now more and more in the industry, and I only anticipate that it would be a requirement almost for firms to be using this type of tool to better the process along. Really, what we think about is, why do we do the clinical trials? Is we do to find the evidence to prove for safety and efficacy of a drug compound or a medical device or a biologic, that sort of thing. But so far in the last, at least in my experience, in the last 40 years, it's been mainly human-based driven, and it's a lot of the work is administrative in nature rather than scientific in nature. So the more that we can release the administrative burden of doing those parts of a regulatory, either document writing or submission or review or decision making, the more that we can release that administrative burden, the better off we'll be, and the more scientific analysis can then go on, and scientific decision making can be made in this whole regulatory process.
How do you see Narrativa playing a bigger role in the regulatory process for the pharma industry and to fast track clinical trials?
So I view the work that Narrativa is doing as being innovative in the way that will alleviate a lot of the repetitive work that is done within writing documentation, whether that be for patient narratives or for clinical study reports or other things like that that are required regulatory documentation that are derived from some source of data. meaning that they're derived from clinical data or clinical trials information or patient information, that sort of thing. That the use of Narrativa's algorithms to then summarize and produce an artifact that then can be reviewed and approved and quality checked by the people that should be doing that rather than actually writing. So what we see is that Narrativa and other use cases that possibly could be used for AI will become commonplace among the clinical trial process, documentation process. It's not saying that it'll replace it entirely. It's being used to augment those things that are cumbersome, time-consuming, and certainly are repetitive in nature that could be done in an automated type of fashion. Again, the AI models have to be trained properly, the use of gold standard data in order to train it against. But once that happens, then these tools can be used to speed up the process, cut down the amount of time necessary in order to get a regulatory documentation together and a submission to be produced to go to a regulatory agency.